When we got there, we saw basically Tibet in total ruins.
When I buried Ken in Arlington and I stood over his grave and I thought, people will know what it is to be a Gold Star mother. People will know what it is to lose a child in a war that you didn't support. And that's my job.
Chinese Communist government is so scared that they're calling our phones. So I think that means something, you know. I think our movement is working.
He turned around, looked at me, and he said, you know, what? And I said, trying to say goodbye.
والله اشتاق لبغداد كلها بهواها بريحتها ناسها. طلع صدام وعلى اساس يعطينا الحريه ويعطينا بلد امين ويعطينا نرتاح ببيوتنا ونعيش يعني فري. شلون هو هسه بلد صلوات كل من عايش بحاله حر. احنا ما عشنا حر.
52-year-old Camila Dulaimi is a long way from home. She came to California 2 months ago, one of over 2 million Iraqis to flee their country since US-led forces invaded in March 2003. And for her, going back may never be an option. This story is not about politics or terrorism. It is not about oil or the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. This story is about people, the individual struggles behind the headlines of the long 5 years of the war in Iraq.
My wife and I were married, and we decided to join the Army to pay off some school debts because we had borrowed a lot of money for college.
In March 2003, 26-year-old Joe Wheeler was home just long enough to see the birth of his first child. 2 days later, he left as part of a medical team for Tikrit, Iraq.
As soon as we rolled over the border, there was a sort of hesitant, we're not sure what we think of you guys attitude from the Iraqi people. They definitely weren't throwing flowers. They definitely weren't smiling.
90 miles south of Tikrit, Camila Dulaimi watched as US soldiers like Wheeler rolled into her hometown, Baghdad.
وجيش أمريكان المركز مال الشرطة بجيش أمريكان المدارس جيش أمريكان حسيت كنت أبكي. ليش؟ ما أدري حسيت كنت أبكي وأولادي فرحة ويحجون وياهم وكانوا أول ما طبوا زينين ويطون الجهال شكليت ويطون يعني راديونات ويطون يحجون ويانا وكانت بنتي دكتورة تعرف تحكي وياهم أجنب ويجون يحكون ويانا بس يعني انقهرنا وضجنا وبعدين.
على شنو القهر وضجك يعني؟
الوطن عزيز.
3 weeks into the invasion, Baghdad fell to US forces. Camila says that then life almost returned to normal.
بدايتها كنا زين. يعني الأولاد يطلعون يشتغلون بسيارة عندهم صغيرة ويروحون للمدرسة وأنا كان عندي محل أشتغل وعايشين. هو تحرير بس احنا كنا يعني على وضعنا ذاك هسه أحسن تحرير.
Liberation came at a price. The end of Saddam's 30-year dictatorship left a vacuum of power that US forces had not prepared for. As Iraq slipped into anarchy, the administration realized that there simply weren't enough troops. In April 2004, soldiers already serving in Iraq found their tours extended by 3 months. Ken Ballard, a native of Mountain View, California, was one of them.
Ken joined the Army because it was something that he wanted to do from the time he was really little. You know, as a mom, and because I raised him on my own since he was 10 months old, I just always wanted him to be happy. And if serving his country by being a soldier made him happy, you know, I always told him, be the best that you can be, whatever it is. If you want to be a garbage man, be a good one.
Ken was Karen Meredith's only child.
He was just so full of life, and I even look at all the pictures from Iraq, and he generally has a smile on his face. Life was an adventure for him.
Ken spent a year in Iraq as tank commander of his battalion. By April 2004, he had packed his bags and was ready to return.
He was all excited about coming home and being, having the food that he had missed for the whole year because he never was able to come home on leave.
On the 30th of May, 6 weeks after his extension order, Ken Ballard was killed. He was 26 years old.
Ken was my only child, and I raised him on my own. My future died when he did. He should have been home.
Meanwhile, in Iraq, Camila's family had a reason to celebrate her son's wedding. For those few days, they were happy, despite the war that raged around them. But Camila didn't know it would be the last time she saw her entire family together. In February 2006, an explosion at a sacred Shiite mosque in Samarra sparked the bloodiest wave of sectarian violence in Iraq's history. For the country's two main Muslim factions, the Sunnis and Shiites, it signaled civil war. Camila, a Shiite herself, was married to a Sunni. Her 7 children are considered Sunni and grew up in a peaceful Baghdad neighborhood where Sunnis and Shiites lived side by side. But after the bombing,
يعني صارت يذبحون يطلع انت هذا السن يكتبون كتاب يذبون ببيتك يعني لا ما طلعت يطبون لك للبيت واحد ولد ودى زوجته بالمستشفى مال الشعلة تطلق وهو سني من منطقتنا يعني هم سني ومسجل اسم زوجته عرفوه انه هذا سني طلعوا وراه من اكو بالمستشفى يعني ما جيش الميت بالمستشفى يفترون بين مكان يقولون هذا سني هذا شيعي لحقوه تو بعد ما وصل اهله لحقوه بسياره او بالبيضه قتلوه هو بسيارته قتلوه اول ما يريد يدوف يوصل الغزاليه لحقوه قتلوه.
Months later, after Camila's own sons were threatened, the family was forced to leave their home and fled to Syria. Joe Wheeler was glad to leave Iraq, but coming home after 8 months, he found the life he'd left behind was gone.
It was very difficult to reintegrate with my wife because she had been living on her own for so long and she had been raising this baby by herself. She didn't really even know how to accept my help. It was very difficult for her to kind of welcome me back. And of course, I had been through a lot of trauma. I had been through a lot of changes myself.
Like one of every 5 Iraq veterans, Wheeler suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Your mind knows that you're back in the United States, but your body doesn't really realize that. Your body still thinks you're in Iraq, and you react as if you're still there.
Even interacting with people has become a challenge. So despite an MBA degree, Wheeler works as a limo driver. Now, he and his wife are headed for divorce. On the other side of the world, Camila's sons, graduates from one of Iraq's best universities, are working as supermarket laborers in Syria.
جيت أنا بنتي سوت لي إقامة طلب يعني وطلبتني وجيت لأن شفت ولدي بعد ضاع مصيرهم مستقبلهم كله ضاع بيت طلعنا منه ما عندهم مستقبل كلية راح.
After a year of living as a refugee in Syria, Camila reluctantly joined her daughter Azhar in Tiburon, California. Azhar came here with her husband 8 years ago and is now a US citizen.
يعني بالنسبة لأمريكا مو الأمي يعني أمي مرة كبيرة ما تفيدها يعني لا تعرف تحكي لا تعرف تطلع يعني كل شيء صعب عليها هنا لازم أنا أوديها وأجيبها ويعني هي مو سهل عليها قاعدة هنا تتغرب يعني بهذا العمر.
As each day in Iraq becomes the deadliest day and the human cost of the war climbs higher and higher, many people wonder, when will this end? And while most Americans go about their lives and see this war as just another headline in the news, there are some who cannot walk away from it.
When I buried Ken in Arlington and I stood over his grave and I thought, people will know what it is to be a Gold Star mother. People will know what it is to lose a child in a war that you didn't support. And that's my job, is to let people know that this isn't something that anybody, I would not wish this on anybody.
I feel like I've had enough stress for a lifetime, and really the best thing that I can do is try and maintain a peaceful and calm existence. At the same time, I try and balance that with political activities, trying to kind of wake up the apathetic masses and get them to take action and to stop the war.
بحال يعني نرجع لبيوتنا وماكو يصير فرق بين السني وبين الشيعي، مو هذا سني وهذا شيعي، ومثل ما كنا قبل. الله كريم ان شاء الله، الله يسوي لها حل ما يخليها هيك. لا ان شاء الله ما يصير، ان شاء الله اكو.
This is the round, and all of this inside here, this is from Shrill. Like I can't say that word.
This is not the way it's supposed to be. A 3-year-old offering her father help with vocabulary.
Rap.
But since Scott Thorne came back from Iraq with a bullet in his brain, very little has been quite the way it should be.
I'm getting better on my speech. I'm starting to be able to feel my hands, my feet, the right half of my body.
This 27-year-old Army scout almost lost it all. Speech, vision, the ability to walk, his life. That he's here to tell his story is a testament to dedicated doctors and to his own determination to come back to his little girl.
It is cold here. I have my house, I got my little girl. Yeah, I'm feeling better. It helps me to feel better when I get home.
At home in a suburb of San Diego, Scott is rebuilding his life, little by little. It's a world away from the dangers of Iraq and the dusty street where he almost died.
Most people try to forget about that day.
It was September 14th, 2004. Scott and his unit were on patrol in the northern city of Mosul.
It was 130. It was hot.
As a combat veteran, he had spent most of his 11 months in Iraq with a specialized outfit tracking insurgents along the border with Syria. But on this day, the young sergeant and his men were in a densely populated city where the enemy could hide in plain sight.
And the whole time we were there, they were firing in different places.
Being a soldier was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream for Scott. He signed the papers to enlist even before he graduated from high school, despite his parents' objections. When he eventually deployed to Iraq, they followed the escalating violence and worried.
Every mother is always scared.
We certainly weren't happy that he was over there, that he was deployed in a combat zone. It's not a fun thing to have happen. But we knew that because of his training and the people that were with him, that he'd have a really good chance of coming out okay.
But war is unpredictable. In the moments before Scott was shot, his squad was on a break from an uneventful patrol. Suddenly, 2 vehicles pulled up on either side of them, and a man walked toward him carrying a weapon.
I fired up right at where he was.
As Scott was about to fire again, he felt something strike his head.
All of a sudden, I couldn't see anything very well. I kept firing though, of course, and then I couldn't hear the vehicles anymore. They were gone. So, and right when I did that, I fell right in the ground. I just laid down there. I looked up. I couldn't hear anything. Then I could hear was my heart.
The hit-and-run attack left 1 member of the patrol dead and Scott and 4 others wounded. These photographs were taken as they arrived at the Combat Support Hospital in Mosul. That's Scott on a stretcher.
The man with the blood on his head here is Specialist McCracken. He was a member of the squad, the only one who was not injured, and he's holding Scott's right hand. He thinks it's no big deal, but I've thanked him innumerable times for being there for him.
I tried to say something, but he didn't understand what I was saying. I grabbed his his hand. I wanted him to look at me so I could tell him, trying to say goodbye.
But it wasn't Scott's time to die. 8 days later, he was at Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. in serious condition, partially blind, unable to speak, and paralyzed on the right side of his body. His family was there with him. Even Allie, his 7-week-old daughter, took her turn.
At the time I was hurt. I just want to make sure I know where she is. All the time that I was in the hospital and stuff, she would go to sleep with me.
Since the day Allie was born, there had been no one more important in Scott's life.
I had to do that, pick her up, and hold her. That was it. Nothing else matters.
In his first days at Walter Reed, he was conscious but struggling to communicate.
He wasn't able to talk. He was able to grunt.
So Steve decided to test his son's mental functions. Using a dry erase board, he asked Scott to copy geometric shapes. He was able to do it. And then he did something no one expected.
When he finished writing, he lifted up his left hand in like a thumbs up kind of a thing and grunted. And what he had done is he had written his name, Scott, on the whiteboard. And he wanted to make it very clear, I'm here, and treat me like I'm here.
It was the beginning of a long and hard road back, with intensive speech, physical, and occupational therapy at a succession of VA facilities. While Scott was in the hospital, General John Abizaid, commander of the American forces in Iraq, awarded him a Purple Heart. Then later, as a mark of respect, Scott's unit presented it to him again when he received his promotion to staff sergeant.
We had him with his platoon, and they called him out, and he came up and was given these awards and decorations. And it just meant the world to him to be in formation with his guys again. And it meant the world to them as well.
It was actually pretty kind of scary. It was really cold outside. The field was not very level. He refused to go out there with his cane. He was just bound and determined that he would go out there and be a soldier.
Eventually, Scott had surgery to insert a plastic plate where a piece of his skull had been removed. Through it all, he remained optimistic that someday he would return to the job he loved.
Even though I got hurt, I didn't just try to get out of the Army. I didn't try to. I want to stay.
Today, more than 3 years after being shot, he's made remarkable progress. This winter, he participated in a Wounded Warriors bike ride at a veterans hospital in Palo Alto. Riding with a partner because of his partial blindness, Scott seemed confident as ever.
It's quite a joy to be able to see him back in the public again.
Hey, Mom.
Bye, Guy.
His blindness is probably permanent.
Both eyes over is black. Everything from here over is all black.
As part of the therapy for his vision loss, Scott learned to play golf at the VA.
I can't beat a blind guy. I don't know what I'm doing out here.
It's a difficult game, even for someone with 2 good eyes.
Where you at?
You want some coaching here?
Come here.
Back it off, about 50%. Just hit it.
Away from the golf course, he learned to work with tools and to cook, life skills he might need when he's on his own. But to Scott, the most important therapy may have been this.
Setting to the...
You sure those 2?
On the... porch. There's not much to do. My child and I go to, when she goes to sleep, and I go, or when she gets onto the phone or whatever, you know, even, it takes me a long time to be able to read.
But you're working on it.
Yes. That's me forever.
After several weeks in the Palo Alto VA, Scott was ready to graduate and go home.
Congratulations.
With help from his parents and brother, he's raising 3-year-old Allie. His marriage didn't survive the stresses of rehabilitation, and it's left him a single parent.
His job now is to be daddy, and I think he's going to do a real good job with it.
Today, being a good dad is his #1 priority, and it's giving him a chance to put his hard work in the hospital to good use.
This is the book. This is the book that Daddy was reading when he was a kid.
I think that over time, as he's working with Allie and she's learning new things, he will learn them just as well.
Yeah. The main reason to be alive is to have my child. And now I want more.
Scott will probably carry that bullet around in his brain for the rest of his life. Doctors don't want to risk the surgery to remove it. Recently, the Army recommended that he be retired on permanent disability. Scott's reaction? That's from the Army, right? Well, I can try the Navy, since they're not as tough. Scott is one of thousands of servicemen and women who have come home from Iraq and Afghanistan with traumatic brain injuries. To all of the wounded soldiers, Scott has this message.
Don't give up. Don't give up.
It's too cold.
Let's go back inside.
The day before the Olympic torch run in San Francisco, hundreds of Tibetans and their supporters gathered for their own Freedom Torch relay.
The Tibetan Freedom Torch is a symbol of hopes and aspirations of the Tibetan people for freedom and justice.
They hope to bring attention to China's recent crackdown on demonstrations in Tibet, as well as the general plight of their people. Crowds swelled to the thousands as the event continued into the night for a candlelight vigil.
The Tibetan people need their suffering to come to an end after 50 years.
One of the 1,200 exiled Tibetans living in Northern California is Tenzin Tetung, chairman of the Committee of 100 for Tibet, a prominent group that includes Nobel laureates, writers and artists who promote Tibet's self-rule.
I think Tibetans are concerned because clearly the Chinese government is using the Olympics as a PR tool, if not a propaganda tool. I felt very comfortable in believing that we should use the occasion to draw attention to Tibet.
Tetung left Tibet with his parents in the mid-1950s. In India, he served as de facto prime minister in the exiled government, and later in the US as the representative for the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader.
We left Tibet because of conditions looking very unstable, because the Chinese army arrived in Tibet towards the end of 1951. It's apparent that there was tremendous amount of tension, a lot of opposition to the Chinese arrival from many parts of Tibet.
This man, who I call Sering, was smuggled to India in 1991 when he was 9. He asked to remain anonymous because as an activist in the Bay Area, he fears retaliation against his parents who still live in Lhasa.
When I was very small, I was very happy. I still say to all my friends that those days were the happiest days of my life. It's just like a community in its full extent, because these neighbors, the city is all mostly Tibetan, and every day there's some kind of sense that it's your home and it's always your home.
Tibet, known as the Tibet Autonomous Region, is China's second largest province and home to over 2 million Tibetans. But another 4 million live in neighboring provinces of Qinghai, Gansu, Sichuan, and Yunnan. The Dalai Lama wants to unite the Tibetan people in these regions in what he calls genuine autonomy. All Tibetans would enjoy cultural, educational, and religious freedoms, while China would retain control over foreign policy and defense.
He believes that if the Tibetans and Chinese have been able to live side by side for literally several thousand years, then there's no reason why they can't live together in the future.
But since China invaded Tibet, the relationship has never been harmonious. Tibetans claim that over 1 million have died at the hands of the Chinese government, and now with a growing influx of Chinese, they fear their centuries-old culture is threatened. In 1980, Tetung returned to Tibet as part of a fact-finding delegation and was shocked by what he saw. Tibet, like the rest of China, had suffered a decade of failed agricultural reforms and cultural persecution.
Almost every town and village we visited, the temples and the monasteries were literally in ruins. And then there had been very little social or economic progress. In fact, in many areas of Tibet, there were severe food shortages and others had even gone through famine-like conditions.
The trip came at the invitation of Deng Xiaoping, then China's new leader, who took a more lenient approach to Tibet.
Deng Xiaoping and Ho Yabang were actually trying to refigure the Tibetan problem and had in fact invited His Holiness Dalai Lama to possibly think of coming back.
The subsequent talks led nowhere, and the Dalai Lama has never returned. He first fled to India in 1959, the year tens of thousands of Tibetans died in a major uprising against the Chinese. It was the commemoration in March of that pivotal event that led to China's recent crackdown. The reaction that followed is a reminder of the support for the relatively small exile community that totals only 130,000. Famous people such as actor Richard Gere and Archbishop Tutu are attracted to the Dalai Lama's charisma and Tibet's unique culture. Thousands of Americans have joined the cause too. After a trip to Tibet, Laurel Sutherland from Oregon got involved.
I've been a social justice and environmental activist most of my life, and it wasn't until really being invited to go to Everest that I played much of a role in the Tibetan movement.
With a team of climbers, he unfurled a banner calling for a free Tibet. He says it's the Tibetan reliance on non-violence that drew him to their cause.
That is one of the hopes for our world, and that those of us in Western countries have an awful lot to learn.
A day after this interview, Sutherland and two others caught national attention by scaling the Golden Gate Bridge to hang protest banners. This year's Olympic torch relay has turned into a public relations disaster for China.
So this is what is in the heart of the Tibetans.
Tsering says that next year's 50th anniversary of the 1959 uprising is likely to bring even larger protests.
There'll be more pressure on the Chinese government, and I think there will be loss of life too. I think many people will get killed.
Beijing has started talks with representatives of the 73-year-old Dalai Lama. Tsering distrusts their motives, saying it is simply a way to buy time, and he warns there's danger in waiting too long.
If His Holiness Dalai Lama dies in exile, there will be revolt. Guaranteed 100% revolt in Tibet. Because the Tibetans can never forgive, never, if His Holiness dies in exile. We can never ever forgive that.
Free Tibet! 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 Free Tibet!
The Olympic torch came through my backyard, and in the days leading up to it, I saw a lot of protests around the Bay Area. I thought it would be interesting to follow a group of Tibetan activists during the build-up to the April 9th torch run through San Francisco. I met Tashi during a nightly candlelight vigil outside the Berkeley BART station. He introduced me to his fellow Minnesotans who drove in to be part of what they feel to be a momentous occasion. He invited me to follow him and his friends as they got ready for the big day.
Alright, so Tashi, where are you guys going right now?
We're going to the United Nations Plaza.
I joined Tashi and his group on their way to a rally for the Tibetan Freedom Torch, the day before the Olympic torch came through San Francisco.
Miss my warm bed. Right, Namgula? I'm tired of sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor.
It's worth it, right?
Yep.
Yep.
As we hit rush hour traffic crossing the Bay Bridge, Tashi and I got to talking about what inspired him to quit his job and spend a month fighting for Tibet.
So what is it like to identify as a Tibetan, never having been to your home country?
It's sad, you know, like, because you tell people, like, oh, you live there, that's your house, but you cannot go in your house, you know. Getting that exciting feeling to get there. I would do anything to, like, have my own country, and, you know, hopefully someday I'll go back, you know.
Please release Tibetans! Release all country!
I'm a citizen of this country. I pay tax, but, you know, there's a need of your own motherland, you know, like where your heritage and your ancestors are from, you know?
The Tibetan Freedom Torch was created to follow the Olympic torch as it travels the globe. The creator's goal is to bring awareness to ongoing human rights concerns in Tibet, a region that is still under Chinese rule. Tashi is one of 9 Tibetan freedom riders biking the Freedom Torch 500 miles down to Los Angeles after the Olympic torch run.
We have nothing to lose, you know. We protest, you know, for our country, you know, for our people, the people who live in Tibet. You know, we cannot do much.
And then from tomorrow they will ride to Los Angeles from San Francisco, and this is just an example of the commitment and the energy of the next generation of Tibetan freedom fighters. So thank you very much.
After the evening's candlelight vigil, the group headed to their home away from home and finalized plans for their 5-day marathon bike ride south.
Ferry building, is that around here somewhere?
This one? Right at the end of
More over here?
During the bike meeting, Tashi got word that many of the Tibetan movement student leaders' cell phones had apparently been hacked. I followed him to a last-minute student-led planning meeting to see what was going on.
Another unknown caller. Let's find out who it is. Hello?
In the 10 minutes that I spent with Tanzin Dasan, the president of the San Francisco Tibetan Youth Congress, he received at least 4 calls from unknown callers, some from anti-Tibetan activists and others that were rerouted to random people's phones. This had been going on for hours before I met him.
That was a random person from Southern California. Her name was Naomi or something. Weird. She just hung up. So I guess the Chinese are really nervous, so they're doing all this just to distract us and to disturb our line of communication, I think.
So how do you know it's the Chinese that are doing this?
Well, sometimes there are actually people on the other line, like, asking questions, and I can tell by the accent it's Chinese.
The next day, I met up with Tashi and the rest of the Freedom Bike Riders while they rode loops around the original Olympic torch route. Later, I joined Tashi as he walked the Embarcadero, where Olympic supporters confronted him.
It's not politics.
Yeah.
This
Really?
is Olympic game. It's
Really?
for peace.
Really?
You have right to do that, but
Yeah.
this is Olympics.
Yeah.
You should have.
Do you know the meaning of Olympics? You
course
just said
I
it,
know.
right?
This
Peace
is
and
peace.
unity and humanity,
You should
right?
have violence here.
We don't have violence. We don't have violence. We support Chinese people. We have nothing against Chinese people. We have against Chinese communists.
What are you guys promoting here?
Huh?
Are you guys promoting human rights?
Yep.
Or separation of the country?
Yep, human rights.
Human rights, but why now?
Why now? Because it's the right movement. People need to be aware.
This is a pure sports event.
It's not.
A few blocks later, I met up with Gendon, another freedom rider. Unlike Tashi, Gendon was born and raised in Tibet, but left the country when he was 15. He fled to Nepal by way of a 29-day trek through the Himalayan mountains after he was arrested and tortured for 2 weeks because he wrote "Free Tibet" on a wall.
First 2 days they didn't really torture me. I think the third day they start, putting bottles.
Bottles were placed between Gendon's back and arms, which were handcuffed behind him. His shoulders were stretched under the force.
This shoulder was dislocated this way and this one from upright, and so I pass out. And then the fourth day, the guy would start asking me questions about specific people, and I didn't give them the names. And then the guy kind of really, first of all, he was kind of slapping me, punching me, kicking me, and he really got aggressive. And he started hitting on my shoulders, first of all, and then later on, he started hitting on my head. And I was trying to protect my head, and I got a scars, I got a scars that I still carry. And since then, I was always looking for freedom. I will fight for freedom, human rights, and any people, any nation, anybody.
All of Gendon's family still live in Tibet. He hopes to see them again one day, but fears his outspoken support for Tibet may have hurt his chances to return home.
They would kill me if I'm in Tibet saying these things, doing these things. They're trying to erase Tibetan culture. They're trying to erase, Tibetan Buddhism. They're just trying to destroy everything.
With the Olympic torch well on its way to the airport for a hasty departure, Tashi, Gendon, and the other Tibetan freedom riders were passed the Tibetan freedom torch during an impromptu closing ceremony.
You know, even though I'm born in India, never felt the pain, the struggle that my fellow brothers and sisters been going through over 50 years. You know, after I sat on the street in front of the Olympic torch, you know, tears came out of my eyes, you know. And I want you to know that don't give up the fight. Free Tibet! Free Tibet! Free Tibet!
Please give it up for them. Tibetan Freedom Riders.
See how much a small number of people can make this massive scale of difference. The world needs to learn this from us.
And with that, they were off on their ride south, with stops planned at university campuses along the coast, all in an effort to raise awareness for the struggles of their people living thousands of miles away.